It's all coming up birdie!
Ooh, we have one of the faces of Odd getting his video. Dan is certainly a weird character, but before getting into that, I need to give you a synopsis of Street Fighter Alpha 3. I did want to talk about Alpha 1, but I couldn't really find any good footage to use from high level players, and second, the fightcade wasn't working. Yeah, the best I could find were task videos, so unfortunate. But Street Fighter Alpha is a very weird game. It's certainly a very large step in a different direction from what you're used to in Street Fighter, with a little bit more anime mechanics rather than your usual grounded Street Fighter stuff, for example being able to block in midair, or a unique meter mechanic that you could choose between. It's a classic 6-button fighter with the light punch to heavy punch, or the light kick to heavy kick, the ones that you recognise. Don't get me wrong, this game is still Street Fighter fundamentals. It's all about playing into spaces, taking your ground and bullying your opponent into the corner. It's just that there's the caveat of this game is very quick. You have to be really quick on your feet when playing this game. There's no air dashing or anything like that, but being able to tech out of a combo to float about, it can make this game very awkward in terms of movement. Now, Alpha's very funny to look at in terms of a Street Fighter game, because it's very widely received to be a good game. Casuals absolutely love it. A ton of people love it. Hell, this is one of my favorite Street Fighters. I used to have it on the PSP. But the only people that didn't really like this Street Fighter were the competitive heads, which is, you know, this is every fighting game. The competitive heads do not like the fighting games that they play consistently. It's just a fact. Well, it's time for the show that was designed to fail. Master of the Psycho-Ogi, Dan Hibiki. Imagine a Shoto. A show uses 3 things to really define what they do in a fighting game. A fireball, a dragon punch, and some type of kicking tattoo move that allows them to approach, avoid fireballs, and maybe be used as a hit confirm. Dan had a lot of these things, but they were very odd. He fights with the Psycho art style, which could be easily described as, I couldn't afford the Satsui no Hado rights, so I'm making up my own. It's very similar to other shows, but he has infinite talent. Story type. Dan's story is a bit tragic, but unfortunately with the character it's attached to, it's very easy to take the piss out of. His father, a practitioner, Warwick, hope I'm saying that right, came across Sagat, who kind of went after inferior warriors at this point as he was a bad guy. His father went to fight Sagat and unfortunately lost his life. But he did take out one of Sagat's eyes, I believe his left one. Dan swore vengeance on Sagat, so much so that you'd practice in his Psycho style very often and try to get over his fear of Sagat so he can fight him one-on-one one day. And through the usual Street Fighter ass tournaments, he's able to fight him and get that one last battle, and he takes the W. However, what Dan didn't know is that Sagat gave him the W so he could take out his vengeance and kill Sagat, as he was kind of done with being a baddie at this point, but not so much. However, Dan is not a murderer. He did not want to kill him, he just wanted to take the W and beat him, and went back to doing his Psycho martial arts style, even offering to teach Sagat, and Sagat basically tells him, no. Never. It's a nice story for Dan, but because of his jokey personality, it doesn't really fit him that well, if I'm honest. It's very goofy despite its nature. But let's take a look at the toolkit and see what made it a quote-unquote failure. Dan, as we know, is a Shoto that is designed extremely differently. We'll get into some of the usual stuff before talking about all the weird Shoto stuff that he had. Dan surprisingly had good normals for a joke character. A lot of joke characters tend to have crappy ass normals across the board, but Dan himself actually had pretty good pokes. Being able to poke from a distance and actually handle space decently in mid-screen was actually pretty good for Dan. Crouching medium kick had some good reach. It was a bit slow into frame data though, so it wasn't that great, but medium kick, standing medium kick, was so good for holding screen space. It allowed them to approach and throw out hitboxes. If he wanted to stop jumping, he had crouching heavy punch, and it was a really good one. A lot of good reach to it. So overall, he had good walling buttons for a Shoto. They were fantastic. His standing buttons were good. He could poke and counter poke effectively. However, he had issues against fellas that could keep him out. And to get into why, we need to look at one of the key fundamentals of the Shoto. The fireball. The fireball is without a doubt one of the main things about a Shoto that makes a Shoto a Shoto. Fireball is like kicking to a footballer. And speaking of football, I really hope that Scotland does well in the World Cup this Wednesday. We gotta beat Brazil. They're just PR demons, right? They're just PR demons. The fireball has to be good for his neutral to be good. Well, Dan's fireball was something else. It went nowhere, and it went nowhere fast. The screen space that it takes up is very minuscule and it doesn't go anywhere. This is a horrible fireball. This is one of the worst designed fireballs I've ever seen in my life. See, if it was active, then it'd probably get way more usage. The best way to use this was to deny a fireball or as a combo confirm. That was it. When it comes to defense, a Shoto tends to have some of the best defensive options in the game, mixed with pretty good frame data and jabs, and of course, the Dragon Punch, an invincible tool that gets the opponent off of you. Dan also had this, but how did he use it? His Dragon Punch was RNG based. That's correct. His Dragon Punch was based on a random number game to make it effective. He had to roll a 1 in 23 to gain invincibility, and you would see the invincibility as he would flash with a big white on him. But that led into a massive issue. If your Dragon Punch was based on RNG, how did you use it in defense? You didn't. After landing your first Dragon Punch with invincibility, it went from a 1 in 23 to a 1 in 15, but it's still, you're gambling a 1 in 15 chance for a get off me. So his defense was pretty bad, right? No, actually, he had one of the best push blocks in the game, sending him back like 80% of the screen space. He was able to avoid a lot of the scarier setups in the game because of the push block. So despite having a shitty ass DP, he was able to just get away from you if you blocked one thing. So his defense was actually fantastic. Blocking one thing meant that you were safe. But you can only do this in Vism, but that wasn't an issue as that was your most optimal meter to pick as Dan. Continuing down the path of a Shoto, you've got the Tatsu coming up next. But Dan's Tatsu, I would argue, is better than a regular Tatsu. Dan would hop up with a knee, and depending on the version that you did, he could do a knee, or knee into a kick, and then lastly with the heavy version, knee kick kick. It's the one where he goes like, Dan, Dan, see ya! So what was interesting about this? Well, the Dan Hibiki kicks, even though they didn't really go through projectiles, had a ton of utility on pressure and offense. If you were able to TK the light version with just the knee, it was an overhead that was extremely fast, hop over lows, and was safe on block, despite the fact that the frame data is usually unsafe, but because it was done in the air and the landing recovery cancels a lot of it, it makes it safe on block. The other versions are also good for being TK, despite the fact that it isn't really needed. And the heavy version, if done in midair, is a great air dash option. He's able to escape the corner with a jump at the Dan Dan see ya. TKing it was good for either retreating or going back. As we can see, this tool had so much utility both in neutral and offense that it wasn't ignored. You had to use it, it was that good. The only issue though is that you can't really hit confirm it. The startup on a lot of these tools on the Dan Dan see ya are really slow, so using them in combos were literally impossible. And that led into his next issue. His combos were lacking. He did not have good combos. It was literally button into fireball. That was about all he could do. He couldn't really hurt you. He didn't have any meterless confirms. He didn't have anything. His combo damage was low. Like if you whiff a DP, the best thing that he could do is a crouching heavy punch into a fireball or DP. That's it. That's all he can do. But he had one massive unique factor that made him insane. Vism. Vism is where you get 2 more clones of yourself and they copy the exact same move that you did, allowing Dan from damage to go from 0 to hero. And you could argue that his Vism is better than everybody else's. Why? He builds it way quicker than everybody else. This was a unique strength to Dan. So he was likely to be stronger than his opponent in some scenarios if he had Vism, which he could build very easily. Is without a doubt a super low tier, as a lot of his tools weren't good as you just saw earlier, and his best normals are just far reaching ones and that's about it. And he didn't have good lows, so his opponent didn't have a reason to basically crouch block it all. It was a whole lot of stand blocking. Even though his damage was really good, it only happens when he hits meter, and if he doesn't have meter, all of a sudden he is weak as hell. He can't do nothing. But you could argue having fantastic meter with fantastic damage mixed with the Dan kicks makes him insane, but there's one massive issue with this. This is Street Fighter. This is a game where most of your roster has fantastic anti-airs, and if you don't have a low to threaten and you're doing a whole lot of jumping, what does that mean? Dan gets anti-aired a ton, and if the opponent has Vism, they can anti-air him into a huge combo, and this was pretty commonplace for Dan. The main thing that sucked about his game plan was how risky it is. He can't just go like, oh, I'm going to play the hop kicky scenario, because anti-airs in this game were insane. It was super risky. If I was to redesign him in the modern day, I'd give him a proper fucking fireball, but I'd also give him scary lows. That way the opponent doesn't have to stand block most of the time looking for an anti-air, because if he had a scary low, all of a sudden they wouldn't be just stand blocking all the time waiting for a jump in. He struggled with style. He had his high moments mixed with his really low falls. But he had one massive positive: he could infinitely taunt. Dan is a very interesting take on a low tier Shoto. More based on getting in and being a bit more aggressive rather than just you doing the usual Shoto game plan, and I think that's to fit his personality. He's a bit more gung-ho. Of course, he's maybe a parody of like art of fighting as they copy Ryo with Ryu and all that dumb crap. Works hard to get in, just for him to get in, and it feels underwhelming as he didn't have any scary mix-ups and his damage was low unless he had meter. He was an uber low tier, and the best player that I could find that was playing him was Mako Zero. Mako Zero being a fantastic player from what I was seeing, who plays all sorts of characters in this game, and I feel like Dan is just a character he plays when he wants to hit that sweet tooth, you know what I mean? Dan is cool. I'm a big fan of everything that he does in terms of offense. Like, sure, he's a joke character, but it's not as if they designed a joke character to be like the worst character ever, even though they kinda did. They kinda designed them with a lot of interesting strikes. Again, the Dan kicks are fantastic, and they look really fun to spam once you get them down. It's just a shame that everything else was bad, but like there's so many cool things to take away from it. Like going like, okay, how do we design him to be good? V-ism. Let's make it so he gets it way quicker. How do we design him to be good? Let him hop in, go crazy with kicks. But the DP having RG is so unnecessary, man. It is so not needed. But Mako Zero being one of the few people playing him, I couldn't find much else in terms of tournament footage or anything like that. The best I could find was Mako Zero playing him for a bit of fun. Today's video, I hope you enjoyed today's odd, and if you did, be sure to like, hype, sub, and tell me who I should cover for this odd series. Could be any weird character that comes to mind. And with that, I'm going to be peacing out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya!